We will try to make it interactive so that everyone feels they can involve. Yeah? Michelle? Okay. And also, if any other of the speakers want to take a place, they are welcome, because maybe in the question section they would have some questions addressed to them. So if you want to take already a seat there, you are welcome. So you have your own microphone. You can take it, so maybe that's more comfortable.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry? Yes?
Yeah.
Everyone is here. We can...
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, you can start, Patricia. I think everyone is here, right? We can start? Okay.
I think it's okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Our last effort. Now the tough questions. And also, if it's okay, there's a format in your folder where we ask for your feedback. And it's according to the, let's say, the strategies of design thinking, where you don't take minutes, but you share your insights, or you share your associations, or you share your questions. And we would very much appreciate if you were to fill in one idea per square, so one like, one constructive criticism, one question, and one new insight on the one side of the page. And if possible, the squares, like you combine a shallow insight with an incremental, so step-by-step innovation. So if this could be done by you, that would be highly appreciated for us to see what we achieved. And we can always explain. All right. Now, there have been many, many, many interesting ideas, so we won't cover all of them. And if you feel that we should discuss one particular one, please shout and I will include it. So I have some questions. So it's about the power of empathy, so understanding and feeling. So it's also an emotional connection. And in Flanders, we have a museum in Antwerp, not far away from here, where they have created an emotional experience of what it meant for people at the time to travel from Antwerp to the USA because there was a shortage of work here and a lot of people fled Flanders. And so my first question is, and it's also related to the discussion in France where they are thinking of creating a museum commemorating what happened in Paris. So what would be, according to you, or what should be, according to you, in a museum that commemorates or that enlivens, that shares the experience of living in this era where we are confronted with radicalism? What would you think should be there? And so I can ask perhaps Radu, as in literature, perhaps it's...
All right, so I will try to then give an answer from a literary perspective. I actually had an elective course in uni about Soviet communism and Nazi Germany, and it was also informative, of course, but besides being informative, we had to read stories of the actual people that went through it. And I'm going to say that it is very nice to be informed, of course, about the issues that happened, but I think when you actually read what those people went through, because most of those books that I read were autobiographies, so it wasn't even fiction anymore, but it was written from the first person, and there was this like, the one that I can remember most is Shalamov. He was a Russian writer that was imprisoned in some of the most gruesome entrapment camps, work camps in Siberia.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he basically showed and he was writing about his experience in this imprisonment camp, and what struck me the most was the way that he was presenting heroes as not people that went against the regime, not people that, people that were still in prison, not people that were fighting against it, just people that survived. And at some point, just spoke their stories. And what struck me the most was that he called himself not a hero because he actually made it out. So the real heroes did not make it out of there. And what we can do is appreciate the memories of those people, but we cannot really get the full story of what happened, because the fullest story to the point of it is of those people that did not make it out of there. So, and it was also a book. It's a compilation of little stories, and basically showed how fragile humanity is. And at some point, you just become a machine. It's a routine that dehumanizes you. And the main goal is not to be a hero, not to, it's just to survive. That's the basic instinct. And when man is put with this instinct in front of them, there really isn't much left of humanity in there. And I think such stories should be put, you should be faced with such memories and experiences.
Humble testimonials of having survived, commemorating those who were not as lucky. Okay. I'll ask one more and then I continue, because I think, Michel, do you want to add what you think is important in a museum that makes sense and that allows people to empathize with what we are experiencing in a world where radicalism is progressing?
Yes, well, thank you. I agree with all of this. We need to focus primarily on the act of suffering. Act on suffering, and we shouldn't focus so much on labeling the direct cause of suffering, specifically the political effects related with this suffering, but just the emotional appeal that suffering has. There are even some evidence in cognitive sciences related. I don't know, maybe one of you know a recently departed neuroscientist, cognitivist Emile Bruneux. I don't know if you ever heard about it.
No.
He dedicated his life in actually investigating the cognitive aspects, the neural aspects of hatred. And he said that there are actual brain regions that activate on some certain material, right? And specifically, he called it the dehumanizing regions in the brain. So dehumanization here.
It's in our neurons.
No, that means that there are particular segments in our brain that actually fire up. And this can cause dehumanization. And of course, dehumanization is one of the most important aspects of radicalization as well. As you know, there is this adage that what is political? Some cynicals say that politics itself divides. There are others. Right?
Yeah.
Politics is designed to flag the enemy. And this is what we should not have in museums specifically. But there are some cases, obviously. In Germany, for example, Germany is a specific country that has developed its own national identity by simply reaffirming their remorse about what they have done. So, but I agree with this. Specifically focus on the suffering and the emotional aspects, right? Emotional aspects, suffering specifically, because obviously that is something that every rational creature, regardless of the political affiliation, whether left or right, we all want to avoid suffering.
Exactly.
Even radicals and terrorists, they're always saying, well, I am justifying, for example, even terrorists justify their actions morally. So there are some, they're not criminals after all. There are some justifications. So I would focus on this specifically.
So the emotional trajectory actually, and
not allow any pathways to politicize something like a museum exposition. I think that would be counter-effective.
And also, if I may add something very, very short, when I went to Auschwitz Memorial, the things that I remained with the most and that I can remember were first and foremost the numbers that were very big so everyone can see them.
Yes.
And also the exposition of little pills that were used to massacre these, very, and I think even though it's very jarring, that is what you need in order to make an impression on people and for them to realize that, you know, this is real and was real and it could be real sometime in the future if you're not careful. You have to be faced exactly with history in its form as it was then. So yeah, that's what I think.
Paul?
Yeah, hello everyone. I would like to share one experience actually. It was an Erasmus Plus project which happened in 4 countries. We participated in Croatia.
Yes.
It lasted for 2 weeks. We were 65 people, so it was for the young people, and the title of the project was Venues of Victims, Venues of Perpetrators.
Oh, wow.
So the idea was to take a double-decker bus and go around Croatia. At that time, it happened some 4 years ago. The idea was to show multiple angles of the conflict, not only of the conflict in the former Yugoslavia in the 90s, but we started with the Historical Museum of Zagreb, then we went to the Jasenovac concentration camp, then we went to Vukovar, where many bad things happened in the 90s, then we went to Brijuni Islands, where Tito lived, then we went to the working camp Goli Otok during Tito regime, then we've met with people who were filming, journalists who were filming the process of the former Yugoslavia, and so on. Yes, so the idea was to introduce young people as moderators at each place. So the idea is to make a proper research and to see what rings a bell for the new generation rather than to impose. So, and by analyzing the outputs, maybe it's going to be possible to see what should be in this museum. So the idea of this project was also to ask the new generation, what would you like to have on, let's say, Gole Otok, the island where the camp existed. So by collecting this information, analyzing, create something, because there are a lot of things, especially if we think about École des Annales, maybe you know, those who are historians. École des Annales, it's a very famous historical school. Friends, there are several generations, and one of the, let's say, latest things, they are focusing on monuments and politics of the remembrance, and also the questions, what is a like monument? Is it a prosthesis of the memory, yes, where people are already do not live, and how this monument should be shaped?
Yes.
Yes, what do they represent? So it's a kind of a complex question.
Yes. Well, monuments in Flanders, you know perhaps the story of a famous king and his preference for hands disconnected from bodies, and we have lots of statues in Flanders, and there's a whole debate going on whether we can still have his statues in our cultural landscape, but because it makes us remember of what we did in Congo, but on the other hand, do we glorify it? And there's a whole discussion. So this is okay. So, but I also realized while listening to all of you, and please interfere, because we have been saying that gender is a very important feature of the whole discussion, and I feel we kind of forgot about it. Can I ask you to take the female statue as we have used in our previous session, very interesting session. Okay, so now I realized while I was listening to all the interesting presentations and workshops that I tend to see, and it's a critical reflection on myself. I will ask you, Ferhat, so then you have time to kind of, so that I kind of have a biased view about radicals as people who are in a way lost or who have taken the wrong turn, who need to be rescued. And I was wondering, is this, so it's my frame through which I see people who are radicalized. And my question is actually, is there another way of seeing them? And is there a way of, and this is probably a politically incorrect question, and that's why I ask it, is there also a limit to our empathy? So can you see it in a different way? And is there a limit to that's?
Radicals are mostly known and accepted as like equated with terrorism. When a person is considered as radical, he is maybe automatically realized or accepted as terrorist, which is not true in also in practice, also it's also approved or like with some findings of the research. So sometimes being radical of your own ideas, it's sometimes not bad thing, unless you are just justifying to use violence to make others accept it, to spread it. So and it is also defined with many research findings that most of the radicals are not engaging in violence. So I think this is the point where we should put the empathy in line, to put ourselves the grievances, the needs, the anger, their emotions. So to feel like them, to put ourselves in their shoes, and to feel, what to be like them. So what does it feel to be like them in their shoes? So I just want to give an example from my like 20 years of law enforcement job. It will be maybe more easier and practical. I met many people who who were joined terrorist organizations, including some teachers and university students, doctors and engineers, just because they or their relatives or friends were tortured, or they were just bullied or beaten or humiliated because of their their religion, the language they are speaking, or the cities, even the cities they came from. And they couldn't find another way to fight against it, against the injustice they perceived. So it is not only about our perceptions or what we are accepting as true, but what they are feeling is important to develop more efficient and productive strategies. I also met like a man. It was maybe the most interesting case for me. I met a man who just left the button of the bomb vest. He was a suicide bomber, and yeah, he just left the button of the bomb vest. And I met several students. They just gave up on their dreams on being suicide bombers. And I met several young people who asked for help from us, how to leave the terrorist groups and continue their education at the universities. They were looking for a future for them. And I also met several students, they just want to continue their educations and want to help the people they are fighting for. And many dramatic examples of this. And the cause was just, we tried to show them we want to understand them. We are trying to understand them. We are valuing them, and we are respecting them, not criticizing them. So it was the only reason they just trusted us and came for help. So as a researchers, practitioners, or I don't know, whatever we are talking about empathy, understanding other people. We have lots of good findings of our researches, but we also have our prejudices, our own biases, our own realities, which the lenses we are looking behind are giving us. Like the optometrist is asking, which lens is better right now, and it depends on the person behind the lens, and there's no right answer. So I think we should, instead of putting a limit on empathy first about other people, I think it is first thing, and I think the most important thing, to learn how we can understand them, and not only understanding them, also valuing, because only understanding is not enough, also valuing their perceptions, their emotions, feelings, their needs, unlimitless.
Yes.
So it would be, I think, better to understand them, to make a connection with them, and to also produce more effective strategies.
Sylvester, I will continue with you. So Ferhat says you have to empathize, you have to walk in their shoes, live with them, and try to understand why. But still, if I understand you correctly, try to change their perspective.
In some point, especially as in some point, of course, you should put some like limit, but it is not like not trusting them, because if you put, if I put, for example, a limit to that person against that person, it will also limit my understanding.
Yes.
So
open
yeah.
mind, but also still. Do you think, because the Bataclan process is happening right now in France, so do you think there's there will be a point where you say, and now I have been open, empathizing, following you, walking in your shoes, feeling your emotions, understood, I haven't been judgmental, because I think we haven't been judgmental in our community. So do you think there's a point for you where you say, and now I've reached the end of my journey, of our journey?
Towards being empathetic and open to
a radical
person. I believe so that if we understand and we empathize with a person who has radical ideas or is getting into violent extremism, there is like a question of time, big question of time. Are we able to understand in time and empathize with the person and act accordingly? Or we don't have that time because that person is getting violent towards others. So there is a big question on time. As well, maybe connected with this topic, there is a short story. There was a king, a good ruler, and he got sick. On the same in the same castle, there was a person, a quite dark person, having a very strong bad language. It was a bit stinking, walking around, trying to get to the throne. But the power of the good king never allowed him. But then the king got a bit sick, and the guards took the king to the bed. In that moment, the person arrived on the throne and seated. The guards came back and they immediately wanted to throw him from the throne, and they were saying to him, "You stink, you are ugly, you are bad," and he was growing. The more they were saying and trying to get him off the throne, he was growing more and more, and they couldn't get him out of the throne. In 2-3 days, he grown so much, the whole castle was stinking, and they didn't know what to do, the guards. The king felt a bit better. He wanted to sit on the throne and rule the kingdom, and he returned back in the room, and he saw him. And then the guards were saying to him, let's try to kill him, to get him out, to kick him from the castle. And the king said, "No, what we should do now," and you just repeat after me, "Let's sit down with him and let's ask him what he needs." And the guards sit down, and the king asks him, "What do you need?" And immediately the person gets a bit smaller. Then he said, "If you want, I give you my throne, you can use my bath, you can wash yourself," and he was getting smaller and smaller. At the end, the goodness of the king actually moved the person to change the perspective he had, that he had to rule the kingdom, not the king. In this way, the person who was bad moved from the throne, and the king just sat back. So I believe that, connected with this story, if we approach in this way, but we have time to do it, then we are in a good direction. We have to act. Not just empathize, but act after, with this understanding. I believe we have a question.
Eva?
I really wonder from you guys, do you think I do believe that empathy comes more easily to some people than others. Do you think do you think that it's a sad thing, like a sad thing, not a sad thing? Or do you think, like, for example, learning a language, it's perhaps a muscle you can learn to train?
If I can take this one,
Go ahead.
I think, and I know this is quite obvious, but maybe, I don't know. I think the more you have been oppressed yourself and the more you have faced prejudice, the more you have had to, deal with the world, and you have hurted. The world hurt you. I think if you had time enough to heal those wounds, I think you are left with an understanding of the world and of so many different perspectives that it is physically, I don't know, I can talk from experience that, there is this saying, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. And I think to be able to say that, you have to have an empathy level, an empathy depth, way beyond, and you have to have gone through things, and I don't know how else you are supposed to hone that empathy. I have been talking about literature, but as direct of a communication that also is, until you feel the pain that you can possibly cause others, I don't think you can really understand what you put others through. So I think, to answer your question more directly, I think there are some people that have been privileged enough, and it's not their fault that they have been privileged. Some people that have been privileged enough may have lower levels of empathy just because they haven't had to go through what other communities, oppressed communities, have had to go through. This is only my perspective, though. So,
thank you, Radu. It doesn't fully answer my question.
So your question is, can empathy be taught, and is it in some circumstances very difficult to? Can it be learned? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Can it?
Point taken.
What Michelle said earlier about the part of the brain that is dehumanizing when you learn to hate. Maybe the more you hate, the better you learn to hate. Could it also be true that the more you learn to empathize, the better, and the more you empathize?
If I can take this one, perhaps?
Yes,
Since
please.
I was called.
Yeah, your name was mentioned.
Yes, so as Dr. Goktev already said, it is extremely important to understand that empathy, I don't have an answer, but I think that it comes from experience. It can come definitely from either your specific life experience. For example, if you are someone who works on more specific cases, not general prevention. This what we're doing are simple general prevention. So we are informing the public about dangers of radicalization. Some professionals, for example, who have either life experience or former extremists, they have this empathy, they have the charisma that comes with this, that comes from their life experience. So they can, however, plug in that type of mentality. Yeah. I think that prevention of radicalization is a misnomer, okay? Because as Dr. Goktev already said, and I completely agree with this, you can't accept that someone is a radical and say that that is a bad thing. It is not a bad thing to be a radical, especially if we are dealing with general prevention, right? Even in special cases of prevention, we need to hear a person out. We need to listen to his ideas. We can never judge him. We can summarize this by saying simply, let's nudge him, not judge him. So let's try to somehow change him bit by bit, but never judge him, because then you are simply blocking this path. And that is in a nutshell, an empathetic approach. So you try to understand the position, the radical position, not judge it. I think that comes with life experience, and maybe someone are, I don't know, gifted in that manner.
And
but I think also a lot of negative experiences doesn't make you necessarily an empathetic person, but this could also cause this resentment and actually cause a contrary. So I don't think necessarily because you lived a lot or you had bad experiences or so that will make you. I think this can go either way. So I wouldn't say.
I would say it goes both ways, definitely, and I want to emphasize that if you have enough time to heal those wounds, then you are left with an understanding that perhaps can go beyond resentment.
Time and resources.
Yes, but I also think on the other end of the spectrum, you have the narcissistic personality, and this is why I refer to it in what next, because one of the features of a narcissistic personality is that they are not able to feel empathy, so they can't imagine or they can't feel with, and so I think they also want to be, let's say, applauded. They want to have a high visibility, and if you remember what Ardern did, she kind of ignored the terrorist. She said, "I'm not going to name him. No pictures are being shown," and she kind of worked against his narcissistic personality, but this is for our next project, okay? So, because otherwise we keep on going and we want to go home. I have a last question because there were many references to education. We had caring education, caring pedagogy, intercultural pedagogy, provocative pedagogy. And I want to share a tiny story of the news in Flanders where we have a right-wing politician, Tom van Grieken, for those who know him, and he said at the beginning of the school year, so the 1st of September, the secondary education, he said, "I want teachers to stop with their left-wing nonsense and wait till next year, because then we also have elections, and I will take care of this problem." And the whole teaching community kind of, because we don't share our left-wing ideas, but our human rights, and that's, so I think education is seen as a tool to react against, but also as a tool that can be used for right-wing or radicalism. So Paul, could you tell us what you think education, formal or non-formal, because I don't want to distinguish, but what can be the role of education and how should it look like?
Well, how it should look like, it's a very complex question. I would say these kind of projects give an opportunity to bring people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions in a safe setting where we can exchange experiences, good practices in order to implement them, maybe modify first, implement them back in our respective countries, organizations, communities, adjust. And for example, there are several people with whom we are working already for several years, Udruga organization, on different projects, media literacy, interreligious dialogue. And every time when we meet, we exchange something. Yeah, but also the idea, as Michelle already said, we are working mainly on the raising awareness level. Yes? So we cannot enforce people to be empathetic, yes, to love someone or to tolerate, but rather to learn about different issues, challenges, problems, whatever you call them. That's on that is the level, according to me, what we are doing.
Raising awareness.
Raising awareness,
okay.
Exchanging practices and testing different.
Yes, so good practice and sharing good practices.
Not only good, sometimes bad.
And bad, okay, yes, all right. There was also the false pictures were good pictures as well. I remember Han. Sylvester, according to you, how would it look like? It's my last question.
Yeah, I believe the education, as we all experience in our own realities and countries, is now having a process of innovation and re-innovation, because we reached the level where the educational system, in a way, is not reflecting the reality we live in now. As we experienced in Croatia, now we are in this new curriculum test phase for School of Life, where teachers are still confused. My sister is a teacher in a primary school, and she still is in a learning process. and innovating methods and tools to be able to transfer the knowledge that should be transferred and should be learned by kids in primary school, but in a new way which will enable them that they have as well life skills, that they can use it in a different ways, that this knowledge is not just for one thing, it's open, innovative, and here it comes the creativity back. Here is the art again used as a tool, because art then is introduced as a tool into educational system, not in a way that you learn how to be an artist, but how to use art to open your creativity levels, to be able to transfer that creativity in reality. This is where is the point of education now important, and that educators learn how to transfer this in other sectors, to be innovative, but respectfully innovative, I would say.
Yeah, we have this bad name, don't we? Okay, Radu, that was Radu. So you have recently graduated. That was what in your introduction. So education is blamed for all the ills of society, so also of radicalization. So could you link this? So there were in your workshop, Eva, there were several situations, cases where people felt alone in school, and so school wasn't a safe environment in the cases. So could you relate to that and say how education, so I ask all of you, so by now you know this, so you can, and then it's the final thing. Radu.
Wow, what a question. I think it's so complex and layered. As you asked the question the first time, I had this answer in my head, and it wasn't necessarily personal, but I could relate to it in many ways, that education can be weaponized if it falls in the wrong hands. And we have history to prove that. When certain regimes, even in Romania, for example, it took me 20 years to find out that we had concentration camps in Romania. We didn't hear anything about it. I stumbled across it in an article. I was researching online for a paper and I found it. We also don't know anything about what the HIV epidemic was in Romania during the communist era. Nothing. So they're only presenting what they want you to know. They don't present their own failures, and so a lot of youth in Romania, I think, they're like, oh, Romania hasn't been so bad historically, and that's because a lot of slavery has been erased. There's this problem with people of color right now, and Romanians are like, oh, why should we stop saying the N-word, which is bad enough as it is, but they say, well, we can say it because historically we didn't oppress people of color. But then you actually did, because you have the Roma people that have been on our land for a long while, and we still fail to integrate and include and everything. But we do like to pretend that we are on the mighty horse because we're Romanian, which the Romanian society is 8-9% Romanian, so it's pretty, homogenous. And we like to say, we're trying to integrate everyone and everything. But in school, you don't learn about LGBT people. If you mention LGBT, most teachers, educators, they will like, okay, we don't talk about that in class because it's political agenda. And that's what I'm saying. I think education is, at least in my country, is still in a stage of censorship. And unless you remove that censorship, you can't really know what the real world is like.
So self-critical pedagogy and education can be added to the list if I listen. So I'm in future education, futuring skills and all the things like that, and they claim empathy is the only thing computers can't take over. So artificial intelligence, they are nearly there, but we still need a human being. So how is education going to work with this let's say, challenge to create provocative, intercultural and care pedagogy with the skill the future skills for the human being, according to you, Michel?
According to Michel.
According to Michel, okay?
Yes, well, I think education is extremely important, but it's only just one part. Right?
Okay.
Let me just give an example. For example, in Nigeria, there is a terrorist group called Boko Haram.
Yeah, I wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, and they found out that actually the best way to de-radicalize already members of Boko Haram is to use their own mothers, their own family, to simply bring them back. These are people that don't have any education.
Mm-hmm.
So mothers were actually the most effective in bringing back the radicalized members. Yes, I think the professor mentioned that.
Yes.
So women and mothers, they're without any education, even angrily said, I mean, this is going to sound a little bit cynical, but they said, hey, why do they pay so many experts in those hotels, fancy hotels, when we can do the job better? Okay, so that is just one part. So it's not all about education. It's not all about, it depends about who is radicalized and who has the most influence over the person that is radicalized. But education, of course, plays an important part. If we are educated, we are less prone to manipulation, and that is the most important thing, according to me. I seriously believe that if you are educated, that you are not going to fall for biases, logical fallacies, and other things, and that you can understand. Yes, Pasha taught me that now
we learned
on the
our
seminar.
lesson, didn't we?
Yeah, definitely. So I simply realized that it can also enforce empathy. You understand?
Yeah.
We can understand that human rights can be beneficial for all of us. There is when we were talking about freedom of expression, I think this gentleman, I forgot who he was, a social democrat. A social democrat.
The speaker?
Yes, the panelist,
Camus?
yes. Yes, there was a question about freedom of expression, whether the freedom of expression would be a problem. Freedom of expression could never be a problem. The problem is how do we use this freedom, and that we understand that freedom has certain limits, responsibilities. Okay, and there is an excellent writer called John Rawls. The book is called The Theory of Justice, and he said that if we are reasonable enough, we can imagine a society where nobody knows what is our current identity. He called this the veil of ignorance. So we don't know who we are. We don't know our identities. We don't know what will be our outcomes, professional outcomes and so on. But we know one thing. We know that we want to maximize the benefit for ourselves. And if we think rationally like this, we will always create a society that benefits those that are less better off, and that we will also create a society that rewards people that are really dedicated, that are really, engaging in some sort of activities. So he said that if we are reasonable, and that of course comes from an education as well. I'm simplifying this, but if we are reasonable enough, that we will create a just society, a society that is in concordance with human rights.
Well,
I mean, it's a book worthy of reading if you haven't read it already.
I think it's a nice book, a nice world view. So it's not about the ecosystem, but the ecosystem, not only about education, but the whole world around, and finding the people who can weigh on their conscience or on their feelings. Mothers can reach out to their children in different ways. And this is also in accordance with your macro analysis. And so the final word is for you. And there's this kind of thing of vertical literacy, which is also about creating the ecosystem to have the whole impact on society, and which is also, it's connected to what you have said, Michel. So what's the role of education, but also the non-formal, all the youth centers, because quite often in testimonials, you hear that youth centers were safe spaces because the people, the participants, connected to people who were in the same situation, whereas in an educational context, this is not necessarily the case. You can still be the only one, or you can still feel alone, whereas there's more conversation and more openness in what Victor Turner calls liminal spaces, so that's in between. What would be your final conclusion, Firat?
Of course, what we are using to protect the community from like for this conference, terrorism, radicalization, extremism. The same tools are being used also by the terrorists or extremists.
Yeah.
So it just depends on how it is used. And education is of course very important among others. And specific to education, I think if it can be like integrated with creative activities such as arts and sometimes sports, and also maybe some practical implementations like practically making students helping others.
Yeah.
Because a psychiatrist mentions that there is also a segment of brain that gives the feeling of taste to understand other people's grievances. It is not enjoying their grievances, but understanding them and trying to help them make a person like happy and gives a feeling of peace maybe and comfort. So if we can show, I can say the students or the trainees, this feeling of taste to understanding and having an opportunity to help other people, maybe we could just give the essence of what we are trying to do. Otherwise, we do lots of researches, we do lots of projects, and we try to give our perceptions and our truth to other people, but the level of acceptance will be limited, I guess. The important thing is to explain the essence of it, the philosophy of it.
Yes.
So if it is supported with created activities, supports and other practical implementations, I think it will be, of course, a powerful tool. And in this case, I think it will be maybe contribute to Eva's question also. It can be learned, I think, and it can be taught. The empathy can be taught and learned, I think. But it requires a desire to learn it.
So we give a purpose to a body system, if you want
Yeah.
to, because there was a purpose. Giving a purpose was also very important.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so this was our panel. Now you have a question, and if there are any questions left.
Maybe just one question.
One question.
Way over the schedule. So one beautiful final question. If there is, if not, we will end because it's really
in perfect English with beautiful words. Otherwise, I think.
No, you can. I mean, anyone can ask a question. But if you really want to ask a question, then we can stay a bit more. If not, we will have to finish here.
Okay.
Omer. Yeah.
So, so there's. I'm sorry.
10
Okay.
It's beautiful.
I also want to draw attention to the guide where we also discuss these questions. And so if you want to have the guide, you can send us a mail or you can download it.
Thank you very much. Our panelists speak about empathy, and mostly we think how ideal empathy can be developed. But a couple of years ago, I noted in my agenda that on empathy, I take these letters. Those who empathize do not understand the other. Those who want to understand the other emphasize. So what I see in the everyday life, mostly people try to understand group members. So empathy can only work if we want to understand, if we're willing to understand the other. And if we want to blame the other, then demonization, dehumanization come to the screen. So, and that through this way, for example, one of the political leaders making some decisions, political decisions, and the followers of this party trying to emphasize this wrongdoing and trying to understand and legalize this behavior. So my question is, do you think that ideologies could block to empathize with the other, with out-group members? Also, maybe the other question, emphasize can also negative aspect to legalize wrongdoings of group members. I don't know if this question is enough.
Yes, it's a
It's
double-decker question, I think. All right, a short answer. Highly esteemed panelists, who can have a short and to-the-point answer? Michel?
Maybe.
Michel?
There's no short answer.
There's no
honestly.
short
There's no yes or
answer.
no answer. But
But it's so ideology and of course, yes, says Handan. Wait, Handan.
You can block yourself, or you can believe you are empathizing with someone depending on your ideology, but I don't know if it is a true empathy or not. Becoming a group member or becoming a party follower, or I don't know, being a, it's Marxism, huh? Yeah. Anything can be block you from a real empathic person, ideology, belief, becoming a group member. In this sense, I can say yes, you can block your,
Okay, and I think maybe this is a good idea to continue in the next project. I thank the panelists. I thank all of you. It was really interesting and thought-provoking. And I thank all of you. You're very courageous people to stay here and keep on listening and asking questions. And perhaps, Ludmila, you also want to share a last thought, not a question.
Okay, all right. I don't know what I could add. I would just want to thank you all for staying so much long that we have initially foreseen. Maybe just a short announcement for those of you, a practical one. For those of you who need to be picked up to the Leuven station, just stay in the hall and maybe we will arrange that all together, because I know we have a venue and that we don't really have a lot of transport coming by. So maybe if you need some help with that, we can discuss this in the hallway. Again, sorry for the delay, and for I think most of you, we will see each other tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you for staying.
Thank you.